very warm welcome to you. Thanks very much for all coming along this evening or this afternoon to attend our Staycation event. It should be an excellent discussion. It is mainly a discussion. In the past, a lot of our events have been based around presentations and lots of images and slideshows and things. This afternoon's one, we usually have them in the evening, so I'm on autopilot. This afternoon's one is, we've got one presentation, first of all, and then it will be an active discussion with the panel and with a lot of contribution, I hope, from the audience as well. So do please stick your hand up and contribute with comments and questions of your own. I'll tell you a bit about the Tourism Society very briefly. The Society, there's a good mix, as usual, of members and non-members here at the event. And the Society is a membership organisation for anybody who's involved in any way in the tourism industry, the travel industry in the UK, predominantly in the UK. We do have overseas members as well. And my name is Greg Yeoman. I'm the Executive Director. I hope you picked up some information downstairs, including the journal, which comes out 4 times a year. And there was also here some more information about our future events. One of the main things we do is organise events like this so that everybody working in the industry has an opportunity to come and hear about the latest developments and also contribute their own thoughts and ideas about what's going on. If you want some more information about the Society, come and talk to me or my colleague Blanche, who is at the back there. Leanne has disappeared. Oh dear. Yes, don't know. Hope we'll be okay. Anyway, Blanche is there, or speak to me, or indeed we have some of our board members here this evening, so just ask around and we'll give you whatever information you might like to have about the Society. Last but not least, well, no, before I do that bit, this afternoon, we've got Ian here, Ian Taylor from Travel Weekly, who's going to be chairing the panel. I'm not going to introduce the panel to you because you've got all the information there in the delegate packs, which gives a lot of background about each person on the panel. What a fantastic panel lined up. And I'll leave it to Ian to introduce them individually and to give you a bit of their background. But lastly, huge thanks, as always, go to our sponsors. As I said, we put on a lot of these events throughout the year, and we do rely very heavily on the very generous support of our sponsors. So we're very pleased to have them supporting us again this afternoon. And the venue we've had, courtesy of the Guildhall Library from the City of London. It's an excellent venue, so thank you very much for that. And also thanks to Maxton's, Travel GBI and Travel Weekly, and especially the Camping and Caravanning Club, who've supported the event this afternoon. Okay, I'll hand over to Ian now, and I'll just, while he's getting to his feet, I will, Ian's hurt his knee, okay, so he's going to start off standing up, but he might have to sit down. It's got nothing to do with the level of interest he's taking in the event, all right, if he has to sit down again. And I've just got to switch to another presentation.
I am going to introduce the panel. So you thought you'd escape that, but you haven't. But just 2 things first. You'll have to excuse me. I'm standing up now, but I can't stand up for the full hour and whatever it is. So I'm going to have to sit down for the discussion. So bear with me with that. But the panellists have kindly sat in this little arc so I can see them. They can't escape questioning. And the second thing is, depending on how rowdy you are, this will go on for a while. It was originally scheduled to go on until 5, but I'm kind of going to let it run on until 5:30 unless people start falling asleep or something like that. But it won't go on beyond 5 because that's enough for anyone. I'm woefully ignorant of about domestic holidays. Travel Weekly covers mainly outbound and some inbound, but not domestic holidays. And I'm aware of, but largely ignorant of the staycation phenomenon. So I'm expecting to learn a lot from the panel we've got here. First up will be Sharon Orrell, who's Head of Research and Insight at Visit England. And she's a vastly experienced market researcher and played a leading role in setting up the English Tourism Intelligence Partnership, I think, with the ONS. So we'll have an opportunity to test the rigour of Sharon's research with the panellists' help after she's done her presentation. And then we will also have the opportunity to put some questions to the other panellists. And if we start from my extreme right, Nick Rudge is MD of Cottages for You, part of the Wyndham Vacation Rentals UK group. Nick has been involved in travel for 3 decades, I think, but and at Cottages for You or companies of that, with not necessarily with that name, I don't know, you can tell me, for some considerable time, since 1997. I saw that Nick is Managing Director of Cottages for You, English Country Cottages, Welcome Cottages, Cumbrian Cottages, and lives on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales, presumably in a cottage, Nick.
Yeah.
Next to Nick is Craig Stewart, who's Director of Free to Book, co-founder and director, I think, of a family business, Free to Book, which is a technology provider to online accommodation providers. And you deal with 4,500 properties in 90 countries. So presumably you're going to talk about the staycation phenomenon worldwide, are you? Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you, Craig. Next to Craig is Hayley Beer, who's the director for Oxfordshire Cotswolds and vice chair of the Tourism Society. You've been in destination management roles in tourism since 2000, so vastly experienced. You're responsible for Tourism Services Tourism Services Unit in David Cameron's constituency. Is that right?
I am, yeah.
That's horrible for you. And lobbying politicians to raise the profile of tourism is something you've got considerable experience of. Yes? So does that include Cameron? Have you lobbied Cameron?
It does.
And
yeah.
does he get it?
He does, actually, yeah.
Is he gonna-
He's been in the local area for a long time, and whatever your political allegiance, he always has been very supportive of it. So
Okay.
I know that will spark some debate in the...
Yeah, it could, yeah, we'll definitely come back to that. I saw in...
And they're recording it, oh no.
I saw in your little biog that you've got a new offer out based on, I assume, on Downton Abbey. I don't quite see what this has got to do with the Yorkshire Country Estate in the Cotswolds, but you put it down as a new Downtown Abbey offer, which sounds fantastic. I mean,
It definitely
much
should
more
have been
interesting.
Downton, not downtown.
Downtown. Okay. Lovely. And then next to Hayley is Robert Loudon, Director General of the Camping and Caravanning Club. And you've been with the Camping and Caravanning Club for 2 decades,
Yeah.
am I right? And Chair of Camping in the Forest and founder chair of the Caravan Safety and Security Group. So important stuff. And next to Robert is Tim Manson. Now, Tim, I'm not sure whether you're Operations and Policy Director or Policy and Development Director of Marketing Birmingham, but you take care of policy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm told you have a strong understanding of all aspects of public funding, local authorities, and the European Regional Development
Especially in
Fund.
Brazil.
So we look forward to hearing about those, don't we? First, let's welcome Sharon Orrell, who's going to introduce you to some research which is so up to date it's not being completed yet. Sharon.
All right, it's not entirely a presentation of unfinished research, which probably wouldn't be much fun for anybody. What I want to do in the next 10-15 minutes is first of all remind everyone of what the statistics are, so what happened with the staycation, what do the volumes look like, and then introduce 3 ideas that I think are important to consider if we want to think about what's going to happen next. So let's start with the numbers. This chart looks at the number of domestic holidays taken by British residents going back to 2006. And you can see between 2008 and 2009, that was the year of the staycation, or those at the back, I'll describe it for you. It goes from 51 million to 60 million. So a massive uplift in domestic holiday taking. 2009 was very much the high watermark, but actually since then those levels of increased domestic holiday taking have stayed with us. So although not quite as high at that 2009 level, we've had 5 years where the number of holidays was really significantly higher than what we saw pre-recession. The flip of that, of course, is outbound travel. And here we see the reverse picture. So again, you see a fairly flat line between 2006 and 2008. 2008, 46 million outbound holidays taken by British residents, dropping to 39 million in 2009 and dropping again in 2010. And again, although there's some ups and downs and a little bit of growth last year, that trend towards fewer overseas holidays again has stayed with us for that period. So far this year, the numbers suggest no change at all in overseas holiday taking in the year to July, 2% down domestically in the year to June. Now, I don't know how the year is going to finish. I don't think anyone does. We're still in the middle of it, but that kind of suggests to me that we're not going to see any double-digit changes in 2014, so potentially more of the same, up a bit or down a bit. So what happens next? As I said, 3 ideas I really want to introduce. The first one is that although the recession is over and GDP is growing and the politicians are talking about how wonderful everything is with the economy, I think we all know that we're not out of the woods yet. We've actually been tracking attitudes to the economy and what it means for holiday taking since 2008. It was one of the very first surveys I worked on when I came to what was then Visit Britain, and my then boss said, there's a thing called the credit crunch going to be happening. We should maybe think about what it means for domestic holiday taking. This chart looks at agreement with 3 statements. I'm very concerned about the economy, concerned about job security, worried about making ends meet. And we see how levels have varied with a peaking concern right early in 2009, and then we thought it wasn't that bad, and then we realised it was. As Ian alluded to, the last data point is from fieldwork that happened just less than 2 weeks ago. So this is as hot off the press as it comes. We've not finished analysing all the data yet. But you can see there's a fairly sharp decline there in levels of concern. I suppose a couple of points about that. That is a big decline for a 6-month period, but on the other hand, those numbers are still quite high. We still have half the population saying they're concerned about job security, 44% saying they're worried about making ends meet, and bear in mind this is an online panel, and the people who respond to online panels tend not to be the most disadvantaged in society, so if anything, this might be understating it. And the other thing, of course, is people may be less concerned about the wider economy, but they're not feeling it yet. So when we say to people, there's been lots of news about the economy getting better, how are you feeling about it? Only 22% are saying that they themselves are feeling better off as a result of changes in the wider economy, which says that 78% of people aren't. That's up from 18% 6 months ago, so that's not changed very much. And interestingly, if you look at the monthly surveys of consumer confidence that come out by the likes of YouGov and GfK, what they're showing is now after several consecutive months of increases, by late summer that was plateauing, that people had realised that yes, the wider economy isn't in as dire straits as it was, but it's not meant anything for me yet. And the implication of that is that people aren't going to be changing their spending behaviour quickly. So again, in the latest survey data, 34% of the population is saying to us that they're spending less on holidays. We ask them about whether they're changing their spending behaviour across a whole range of things, from the supermarket to fuel to clothes and going out and so on. That's down from where we were in February, then it was 39%. But what we also ask people is, are you going to change this? And I think this is the really key thing. Around 1 in 10, 11% of those, so 11% of the 34%, which is 3 to 4%, say, yes, I can see a point where in the near future I'm not going to have to do that coping behaviour anymore. Around 38% are saying, I can see a time when I'm going to be able to stop that, but it's not in the near future. And the other half can't actually see themselves stopping doing that. So again, I think what this tells us is it's going to be a slow burn with the economy. The recession is over, but it's going to take a while before wage growth overtakes inflation and therefore people feel like they've got more money to spend. And the other impact of the recession is an interesting one, is this notion of discretionary thrift. Around 70% of us agree that we like to find bargains even when we don't need to save the money. And you see the newspaper headlines, it's true. Why is Tesco in such a bad place? It's because the middle classes have discovered Aldi and Lidl. Nobody goes to Pizza Express anymore without a voucher. This is deeply ingrained in what we do. And we did some futures work with a consultancy called Trajectory last year. They interviewed various people. I think this is quite a neat quote from Gavin Flynn at IHG. It's habit forming rather than just a blip. For younger people, a significant proportion of their life has been spent in this climate. It's seen weird to pay it's seen as weird to pay over the odds. People in their mid, even late 20s haven't known anything else in their adult buying behaviour than looking for deals, looking for discounts, comparing prices. It's not going to stop. The next point I want to make is about what exactly the staycation is, because actually when you look at that stacked bar chart that I showed you before comparing domestic versus overseas, it looks very much like it's been a straight switch, doesn't it, from one to the other, and people moving from the classic overseas sunshine holiday perhaps to a British beach. What I want to talk about now is that the staycation may not be that. It may not be what you thought it was. That's one element of it. But when we started investigating the staycation back in 2010, what we found was a group that we dubbed them the extras, who were people who were taking more domestic holidays, partly as a result, I think, of all the media noise around it and various other reasons, but not necessarily cutting out their overseas breaks. And the other thing we've seen over the past few years is a shift in the type of breaks that people want to take. And I just wanted to show you some of the evidence around that. So let's start by looking at trip length. This chart looks at the difference in the number of trips taken last year versus 2006. So the red bar is domestic holidays, the blue one is overseas. So what this tells us is that since 2006, an additional almost 5 million short breaks have come into the domestic market, but we've only cut out 2 million overseas short breaks, some extra breaks coming in. Longer breaks, we've cut out almost 6 million, but we've only gained 500,000. Now, there may well be some substitution going on domestically, that some people have stopped taking longer domestic breaks and started taking shorter ones as a means to save money. But this tells us something quite important about a shift in structure of the market. And qualitatively, what we're hearing from people is actually they quite like that. I think it's something to do with instant gratification. People don't want to save for 50 weeks, take a 2-week break and then not do anything for the next 50 weeks. And almost especially when times are hard, we want to have lots of treats through the year. And the key thing about this is that I think this offers opportunity for the domestic market beyond the period of the recession, because actually this is something the domestic market does really well. And we've also picked up people falling out of love with the budget airlines slightly. There is no such thing as a really cheap flight if you just want to go away for a weekend. And the romance of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning to visit Poland's third city is perhaps not what it was 10 or 15 years ago. So I think that may be an opportunity. I also talked about a change in the type of trips that people take. So again, this looks just at holiday trips domestically going back to 2006. The single biggest area of growth in the market has been leisure trips to cities and large towns, 26% growth since 2006. And last year, for the first time, there were more holiday trips taken to cities and large towns than there were to seaside destinations. Seaside is fairly flat, down slightly, but actually you see the staycation blip in 2009. Since then, it's more or less tracking flat. Rural trips, I've not shown on here to try and keep the chart clear, but they're up by, I think it's about 1.4 million trips and about 16%. So more trips taken to rural, more trips taken to city areas, not so much to seaside. We've changed the portfolio, if you like, of the trips that we take. And again, I think this bodes well for the future because it does talk about the breadth of the domestic product and perhaps product that isn't always as reliant on the weather. And the third thing that we've seen change is the people who take the trips. Again, a comparison, 2006 to 2013 in the numbers of trips, or the change in the number of trips taken by different age groups. Almost 4 million additional trips, holidays taken by the over 55 age group, and yet they've only cut out 2 million overseas ones. And if you look at the over 65 age group, they haven't cut out any overseas trips at all. So everything you're reading in the paper about how the baby boomers are stealing everyone else's inheritance, it's proved there. At the other end, younger people are taking fewer trips both overseas and domestically. And I think there is a financial component there, that those are the groups who perhaps felt the recession the hardest, youth unemployment, perhaps young families with one wage earner at home. And you see this even more starkly if you look at the trend by social grade. I've not shown it here because we don't have the equivalent IPS figures, but we've seen around a 30% increase in trips taken by ABs. It's the most affluent social grade since the onset of the recession. And so I don't have the data, but it would very much surprise me if they were the group who had cut back most on overseas trip taking. I doubt it. At the other end of the market, the DEs, the least affluent ones, are taking 20% fewer trips now than they were in 2006. Again, that's about 1.5 million trips. And that's quite an interesting thing, and one that people aren't necessarily talking about, because if we are going to see some of those switched staycation breaks move from domestic to overseas as the economy recovers, potentially we're also going to see some of those people who dropped out of the bottom move back into the market if affluence really spreads then through all sectors of society. But what about the switchers? Here, what we picked up right at the start in early 2010, we've continued to pick up, is really mixed sentiments about the future. Might not be quite as neatly chunked up as this Venn diagram suggests, but again, in our staycation research, we asked people, how does taking a break in England rather than abroad make you feel? Around half of those who said, I took a break domestically, which otherwise would have been one I'd taken abroad. About half of those said it made me want to take more holidays in England in future. Around half said it made me want to take more holidays abroad next year, and about half of those agreeing to one agreed to the other. But what I think this shows us is actually the spread of views. At the one extreme, you've had the people who've really been hostages to domestic breaks. They've taken them because they can't afford to go abroad. They've not really enjoyed it. It's not for them. It was like focus group, I remember, in, again, 2010, and a lady who said, well, we heard all the fuss. We went to Cornwall. We were bored rigid because there was nothing to do but go for walks and look at things. She hated it. If it's not your cup of tea, it's not your cup of tea. And those people will go abroad again when they can afford to. At the other end, we've had people who've really enjoyed the experience, often far more than they thought they were going to. The product is far better than they remembered it. They enjoyed doing activities and exploring things, especially with families and creating those family memories. And I think those people will increasingly keep the domestic break as part of the repertoire going forward. And in the middle, maybe that's our battleground. They've enjoyed their domestic breaks, but if you've not been able to go afford to go abroad for 4 or 5 years, then you probably are at the point where you just yearn for that sunshine, you yearn for that trip. They want to keep domestic breaks as part of their repertoire because they've enjoyed them. They're probably not going to have as much money to do as much of both, and those are the ones that we're going to have to really fight for. My third point is to remind ourselves, and I think this was hinted at in the previous section, that it's not all about the economy. It's very tempting to look at those tourism trends and say that the economy was the driver of everything and is going to be the driver of everything. It's not. There are lots of other trends around. That would be a separate presentation, but just to highlight a couple of key things. The ageing population. I talked about the over 55s taking more trips. In part, I think it's because they've been less affected by the economic climate than others. But there's more of them. The baby boomers are now heading to retirement, and the key thing about the baby boomers is they're not going to behave like old people ought to behave. So there's a key opportunity. What the family is changing as well. More complicated families, step parents, more multi-generational trips as well. That's something we've picked up in. Our research has suggested that 1 in 10 over 55s last year took a trip with their grandchildren. I think if we'd gone back 20 or 30 years, that wouldn't necessarily have been the case. So you've got more families doing things together. And again, the domestic product, I think, sits very well with that audience because it's a lot easier to get those multiple people in one place within this country rather than trying to get them all abroad. We've changed as a society, the play society. This chart's an interesting one. It's ONS data. The red line on this is total household consumption, spending on everything. And you see what happened in 2008 where it just falls off a cliff. The blue line on a different scale is household spending on recreation and culture. Through the period of the recession as a nation, we've actually spent more on recreation and culture. So it's actually a bigger proportion of our household budgets now than it was pre-recession, which seems really counterintuitive because what you'd expect is that when times are hard, people will save money, will be spending their money on the mortgage or the rent and the utility bills and cutting back on the non-essentials. Play, leisure is an essential to us. And if that's what happened during the recession, then again, I think there's an opportunity post-recession to capitalise on that. And technology, I'm not convinced that the Apple Watch is going to be the next big thing for tourism, but technology has changed tremendously since 2008. Twitter existed then, but it wasn't really a thing. Groupon, not so much so. Lots and lots of different changes in the way that we get inspiration, in the way that we plan and we book our holidays. Obviously, that applies to overseas trips as well, but I think one of the key trends that technology has enabled, and again plays very well to the domestic market, is last minute. I don't have the trend for last minute, but everything I hear tells me that that has become more and more important in recent years. And the reason it's important is because of technology. You can research a trip on, I can research a trip on the train on the way home on my iPhone. I can get home, I can book it. I don't need to ring anyone. I don't need to plan it in advance. And again, that I think is another key opportunity for the domestic market, because unless you've got very deep pockets, deciding today that you're going to fly to Barcelona for the weekend is going to be quite an expensive undertaking. Obviously much more behind that, but that was just highlighting it. And one final statistic, we've been trying to keep notes of all those numbers. This is the last one now. 68%, and 68% is the people who told us that when we asked about different ways that they might have changed their behaviour, said that they had in some way changed their holiday behaviour over the past few years. Not necessarily switching to domestic, sometimes cutting back spend altogether, sometimes doing different activities. But I think the point there is it's been a massive shift in behaviour since the recession hit us. Not just about people saving money, but it's been it's been complex, and I don't know what's next. I don't think anybody does, but I think what I do know is that we're not going to backpedal to 2008. Too much else has happened. There are threats, I think, in that there is pent-up demand for overseas holiday taking, and when the economy recovers, as people have more money, they are going to start taking those trips. But I think there are opportunities for the domestic product as well, that are perhaps independent of the economic climate, but I think we are going to have to work at it. That was what I had to say. I think it's now over to the Q&A session. The panel can shunt.